Pacific skies, May 1943, 06:42 hours. Japanese pilots at Kahili Airfield gathered around the intelligence board, pointing at reconnaissance photos of the strange American fighter with its inverted gull wings. They laughed at its long nose. Many would later call it whistling death, said with mock fear. Stay to hear the exact order that would flip 2 years of Japanese air doctrine in just 48 hours. The laughter made sense. For 18 months, their Mitsubishi Zeros had dominated every dogfight from Pearl Harbor to the Solomons. Turn radius unmatched. Climb rate at low altitude superior. Their pilots averaged 300 combat hours. The Americans kept sending Wildcats and P-40s that couldn't keep up in a turning fight. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa's squadron alone was credited with dozens of victories without losing a single Zero in air-to-air combat. The new American plane looked even more ungainly than the ones they'd been shooting down. Its nose stretched 12 feet. The wings bent at sharp angles. The cockpit sat so far back that forward visibility seemed impossible. Japanese intelligence reports noted the Americans were having trouble landing it on carriers. Perfect. VMF-124 led the proving runs starting that spring. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh examined performance numbers at Guadalcanal that the Japanese hadn't seen. Top speed, 417 miles per hour. The Zero managed 331. The speed gap meant squadron leaders would cancel any turn-in and order pilots to extend. Power, 2,200 horses from the Pratt & Whitney R2800. Double Wasp, the Zero's Sakai engine produced 1,130. Armament 6. Browning 50 caliber machine guns with 2,400 rounds total. The Zero carried 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, with only 120 rounds for the cannons. But numbers on paper meant nothing until proven in combat. The proving began on a mid-May sweep over the Russell Islands. Walsh led 6 Corsairs from VMF-124 at 22,000 feet. Japanese ground observers and early warning posts picked them up and scrambled 9 Zeros from Kahili, climbing hard to intercept. The veteran flight leader expected the Americans to descend and turn, entering the horizontal combat where Zeros excelled. Instead, Walsh's voice crackled across the radio. Maintain altitude. Let them come up. The Zeros climbed for 12 minutes, engines straining, reaching 20,000 feet with depleted energy. That's when Walsh pushed his stick forward. The Corsair's dive exceeded anything the Japanese leader had encountered. His Zero shuddered at 410 miles per hour, approaching its structural limits. Walsh's Corsair accelerated past 450. The gap opened to 800 yards. Then 200. The pilot pulled up hard, expecting the heavy American fighter to overshoot and struggle to climb back. But the Double Wasp engine had power to spare. Walsh pulled 4 Gs, converted speed to altitude, and arrived 2,000 feet above the Zero in seconds. The Japanese pilot's combat report, recovered later, contained a single devastating line: cannot match vertical performance. VMF-124's after-action report recorded 6 Zeros destroyed, no Corsairs lost. But the real damage happened in the Japanese ready rooms that evening. Pilots who'd survived described something unprecedented. The American planes didn't fight, they executed. Dive from altitude, 1 firing pass, zoom, climb back to safety. If a Zero tried to follow the climb, it stalled. If it dove to escape, the Corsair followed and closed the distance. A veteran ace told his squadron commander, "They choose when to engage and when to leave. We just react." The cockpit filled with the smell of hot oil and cordite after each diving pass. Pilots felt the airframe vibrate at 2,700 RPM as they pushed the throttle forward. Spent brass casings rattled across the wing roots when the 650s opened up. Later that spring, a Marine lieutenant discovered the Corsair's one vulnerability during a dogfight over Bougainville. Pulling too hard out of a dive, his engine coughed. Oil pressure dropped. The massive engine torque rolled the aircraft left. 2 Zeros immediately curved toward him. But he had altitude. He cut throttle, deployed flaps, and let the Corsair fall like a brick. The Zeros overshot. When he restarted the engine at 8,000 feet, oil pressure returned. He climbed back to 20,000 feet and shot down both pursuers on the next pass. The lesson spread through Marine squadrons within days. Respect the machine's limits, and it becomes invincible. Early carrier trials had nearly grounded the type entirely. The long nose blocked forward visibility on approach. Pilots bounced hard off the deck, sometimes breaking landing gear. The torque roll caught inexperienced pilots off guard. Marine land-based squadrons carried the combat load while carrier procedures matured into 1944. By then, the damage in the Solomons was already done. Japanese communications, intercepted by Allied intelligence, revealed growing desperation. A transmission from Rabaul in early June. Patrol encountered F4U types above position 5478, cannot reach their altitude. Request permission to avoid engagement. Permission denied. Tokyo still believes superior pilot skill could overcome mechanical disadvantage. They ordered more aggressive tactics. Close the distance. Force turning fights. Make the Americans fight like Zeros fought. The order killed experienced pilots faster than training could replace them. In one June ambush attempt over New Georgia, 12 Zeros positioned perfectly using cloud cover attacking from the sun. The squadron leader personally led the bounce. The Corsairs simply climbed away. Full throttle, the Zeros pursued, engines overheating until the Marine flight reversed at 28,000 feet. Ice formed on the canopies at that altitude. The diving attack destroyed most of the Japanese formation in minutes. The surviving flight leader's combat report changed doctrine. Recommend avoiding engagement with F4U type unless possessing numerical superiority of 3.1 or greater. Coming up, the controller's exact phrase pilots hated hearing, avoid single combat, and the math that forced it. By mid-1943, local exchanges often ran 3.1 or better for Corsair units. Japanese pilot training, cut from 18 months to 6 months due to losses, couldn't maintain quality. New pilots arrived at Rabaul with 60 flight hours. Marine Corsair pilots averaged 600. The skill gap multiplied the mechanical advantage. A replacement pilot's diary, found after the war, described his 5th mission. Saw F4U diving toward us. Tried to turn. Wing commander screaming to dive away. Too late, 3 planes exploded. I survived by accident. Clouds hid me. Intelligence officers at Truk noticed the pattern in after-action reports. Zeros engaged, 43. Zeros surviving, 12. Corsairs engaged, 8. Corsairs lost, 0. The mathematics of attrition pointed toward annihilation. A staff officer suggested modifying tactics to avoid Corsairs entirely, focusing on attacking bombers and transports. Admiral Kusaka rejected it initially. The Imperial Navy didn't run from fights, but the daily loss reports accumulated on his desk. Early September, 4 Zeros lost over Vella La Vella. Days later, 6 Zeros lost over Columbangara. The following week, 8 Zeros lost. 2 Corsairs claimed damaged. Later that year, VMF 214, Black Sheep, Major Gregory Boyington, joined the fight from Bougainville, pressing the advantage over Kahili and Rabaul. They delivered the psychological killing blow in mid-September. Boyington led 24 Corsairs on a fighter sweep over Kahili. Japanese radar tracked them approaching at 25,000 feet. 42 Zeros scrambled, the largest intercepting force assembled in weeks. Boyington split his formation into 6 divisions of 4. Each division maintained altitude discipline. No individual heroics. Pure systematic execution. Dive, shoot, climb, reposition. The engagement lasted 23 minutes. By multiple accounts, the tally ran into dozens of Japanese fighters downed for no Corsairs lost, with only minor damage reported. Radio intercepts captured the chaos in Japanese communications. They're everywhere above us. Cannot reach attack position. Breaking off, engine failing. Where did they come from? The panic infected ground control. Controllers stopped vectoring fighters toward Corsairs, instead broadcasting warnings. F4U types bearing 270, Angels 25, avoid, avoid, avoid. Diving passes from Corsairs through rough air across Japanese formations, jolting lighter airframes. In the bitter cold at altitude, control responses stiffened and cockpit frost crept across panels as pilots tried to hold formation. A squadron commander led 12 fighters in early October when 8 Corsairs appeared over Bougainville. His pilots immediately turned east, running for cloud cover. But running meant presenting their tails to the Americans. 4 Zeros exploded before reaching the clouds. The commander faced an impossible choice: fight and die quickly, or run and die slowly. He chose to fight, pulling his remaining fighters into a defensive circle. The Corsairs climbed to 30,000 feet, then attacked in sequence. Each pass destroyed 1 or 2 Zeros. The defensive circle collapsed. Ground crews noticed the change in October. Maintenance logs showed aircraft returning with full ammunition loads. 16 Corsairs could patrol over Bougainville for 2 hours without encountering enemy fighters. Japanese aircraft remained grounded despite perfect flying weather. Radio intelligence confirmed multiple squadrons at readiness, but no scramble orders issued. Captured documents later revealed why. Radio intercepts and unit briefings increasingly advised: avoid single combat with F4U, engage only with numerical advantage, 2.1 to 3.1, or when defending vital assets. Morale in Japanese squadrons collapsed faster than the planes. Veteran pilots who'd flown at Pearl Harbor found themselves helpless against American rookies in Corsairs. The aircraft performance gap negated every advantage of experience and skill. A senior pilot wrote to his wife, "The new American fighters own the sky. We take off knowing we might not land. Honor demands we fly, but tactics no longer matter." The letter never sent. He died days later when 4 Corsairs caught his patrol climbing out of Bougainville. Boyington perfected the psychological warfare component. His Black Sheep squadron would orbit just outside anti-aircraft range, visible from Japanese airfields, daring fighters to take off. When Zeros launched, the Corsairs climbed to 30,000 feet and waited. The Japanese pilots faced humiliation: engage and die, or return to base without fighting. Both choices destroyed morale. A mechanic's diary from Kahili described pilots drinking heavily before missions, convinced they flew to certain death. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with fear sweat in Japanese cockpits. Pilots gripped their control sticks with white knuckles, watching Corsairs circle above like vultures. The mathematics of the Corsair created an air superiority feedback loop. Fewer experienced Japanese pilots survived each engagement. Replacement pilots arrived with minimal training. They died faster, further reducing the experience pool. By November, entire Japanese squadrons consisted of pilots with less than 10 combat missions. They faced Marine pilots who treated air combat like a mathematical equation. Energy equals altitude plus speed. Position determines victory. The Corsair gave them all 3 advantages. Supply runs became critical as forward bases burned through ammunition faster. Marine armorers worked through the night-loading belts of 50 caliber rounds. Each Corsair consumed 400 pounds of ammunition per sortie. The logistics chain strained to keep the fighters armed, but the Japanese couldn't replace their losses. Every dead pilot meant 300 hours of combat experience gone forever. Every destroyed Zero took months to replace. The Corsairs kept coming. In mid-November, 32 Corsairs escorted bombers to Rabaul. The Japanese assembled their largest defensive force in months, 68 Zeros. Admiral Kusaka personally ordered maximum effort to stop the raid. The Zeros took off in 3 waves, trying to overwhelm the Corsairs through numbers. It became a massacre. The first wave of Zeros climbed toward the bombers. 16 Corsairs dove from 28,000 feet, destroying multiple fighters in the initial pass. The second wave tried to engage the diving Corsairs. The remaining 16 Marine fighters, maintaining altitude, executed picture-perfect boom and zoom attacks. The third wave of Zeros, seeing the destruction, scattered in all directions. Corsairs chased them down individually. The losses mounted so fast that ground controllers stopped counting. The raid shattered Japanese naval aviation doctrine. Since 1940, the Zero represented technological and tactical superiority. Pilots trained for years, perfecting turning combat, deflection shooting, and aerobatic maneuvers. The Corsair made those skills irrelevant. Speed and altitude beat skill and courage. A pilot's last letter summarized the futility. We are samurai fighting against machines. The machines win. Rabaul's command staff faced reality in late November. A meeting convened to discuss tactical adaptation to F4U threat. The discussion lasted hours. Every proposed counter-tactic failed against the Corsair's basic advantages. Attack from above. The Corsair climbed faster. Attack from below. The Corsair dove faster. Force close combat. The Corsair's 650 calibers outranged Zero weapons. The math was simple. 2,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition meant sustained fire for nearly a minute, while the Zero's 120 cannon rounds lasted 7 seconds. Use superior numbers. The Americans kept producing more Corsairs. The meeting ended with a single conclusion: avoid engagement unless absolutely necessary. The guidance spread through intercepted messages and captured briefings. Units encountering F4U type fighters would avoid combat unless defending critical installations or vessels. Preservation of aircraft and pilots took precedence over offensive action. The Imperial Japanese Navy, undefeated in air combat for 3 years, admitted through multiple channels it could not fight the F4U Corsair. By late 1943, Corsair units hit fields like Tabera and found fighters fueled and armed, but not scrambling. Ground crews watched while bent-wing strafes tore into revetments, a scene that reappeared across Rabaul's satellite strips. The roar of double Wasp engines at full throttle echoed across the fields. Mechanics asked pilots why they didn't launch. The response became standard. Orders are to preserve aircraft. Launching against Corsairs is not preservation. The psychological victory exceeded the tactical one. Japanese naval aviation, built on aggression and spirit, transformed into a defensive force, avoiding combat. Pilots who once sought battle now studied weather patterns to avoid patrol areas. Morning briefings focused on evasion routes rather than attack profiles. Maps in ready rooms marked Corsair bases with red circles labeled Avoid. The warrior culture that produced Pearl Harbor couldn't accept running from fights, but couldn't survive engaging Corsairs. By war's end, the F4U's overall score stood near 11-1 against all Japanese aircraft types. But the real measure appeared in Japanese operational reports. Sortie rates dropped 70%. Combat air patrols shortened from 4 hours to 90 minutes. Reconnaissance flights avoided areas where Corsairs operated. The Imperial Navy's air arm still existed, but no longer fought. Oil lines in Corsairs needed constant attention in the tropical heat. Maintenance crews discovered that prolonged dives could cause pressure fluctuations. They developed pre-flight procedures to check hydraulic responses. Japanese mechanics faced different problems. Their Zeros required engine overhauls after every 20 hours of combat flying. The Sakai engines couldn't handle the sustained high-altitude pursuits that Corsair engagements demanded. Cylinders cracked. Oil pumps failed. The mechanical attrition matched the combat losses. The Corsair's dominance created strategic effects beyond air combat. Japanese commanders couldn't provide air cover for convoys. Troop transports moved only at night. Supply runs to forward bases became suicide missions. Islands that depended on air resupply faced starvation. The Solomon Islands campaign, expected to last years, collapsed in months. As some post-war summaries put it, the Corsair was credited with tipping the Solomons air battle, with other arms amplifying the effect. Japanese pilot training revealed the depth of defeat. New curricula emphasized survival over victory. Instructors taught evasion maneuvers, escape routes, and how to identify Corsairs at maximum distance. Combat tactics focused on attacking only when Corsairs weren't present. The manual distributed in early 1944 contained telling guidance. Engaging F4U fighters should be considered only when no alternative exists. Survival to fight another day serves the Emperor better than meaningless death. During Operation Hailstone in February 1944, dozens of Corsairs joined the strikes on Truk. The Japanese stronghold housed hundreds of aircraft across multiple airfields. When Corsairs appeared overhead, Japanese fighters executed the new doctrine perfectly. They ran. Zeros, Oscars and Tonys took off in all directions, fleeing toward Palau, Guam and Saipan. Those too slow to escape tried hiding in clouds. Corsairs hunted them relentlessly. Over 2 days, hundreds of Japanese aircraft were destroyed, many while trying to flee or hide as doctrine shifted to preservation. The intelligence summary from Truk's commander contained one line that captured complete defeat. Request no further fighter aircraft be stationed at Truk. They cannot survive against F4U types. A surviving pilot from Truk wrote a report that circulated through Japanese training squadrons. He described watching friends die while running from Corsairs, the humiliation of abandoning wounded pilots, the shame of hiding in clouds while Americans destroyed their base, the acrid smoke from burning aircraft mixed with morning fog. He concluded, "We are not warriors anymore. We are prey. The Corsair killed more than planes and pilots. It killed the mythology of Japanese air superiority, the spirit that drove their early victories, the confidence that skill could overcome material disadvantage." By March 1944, Japanese pilots took off expecting to die, not from glorious combat, but from one-sided execution. They painted personal messages on their planes, not victory slogans, but farewell poems. Ground crews stopped celebrating returns and started expressing surprise when pilots survived. Ice crackled on canopies at 25,000 feet, where Corsairs waited. The temperature dropped to -40. Pilots breathed oxygen through frozen masks, but the tactical advantage of altitude outweighed any discomfort. Japanese pilots climbing to intercept arrived with sluggish controls and fogged windscreens. The Corsairs dove through them like hawks through sparrows. Marine Captain James Sweat, who shot down 16 Japanese aircraft in Corsairs, described the late war engagements. They stopped fighting. You'd dive on them, and they'd scatter like minnows. Some would dive for the deck. Others would climb toward clouds. A few would just fly straight and level like they'd given up. It wasn't combat anymore. It was sad. The whine of superchargers at altitude became the sound Japanese pilots feared most. At 25,000 feet, that distinctive whistle meant Corsairs circling above, waiting to dive. The numbers tell the strategic story. In 1943, Japan produced 7,047 combat aircraft and lost 6 to 203. In 1944, they produced 13,811 and lost 12,994, but production couldn't replace experience. New pilots arrived at squadrons with 40 hours flight time to face Americans with 400. The Corsair turned every engagement into mathematical certainty. Speed advantage plus altitude advantage plus firepower advantage equals victory. No amount of courage changed the equation. By spring 1944, identification sheets and ready room boards began marking the F4U at the top with blunt guidance. Avoid engagement. Report and withdraw. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which began the war with the world's best naval pilots and fighters, officially surrendered the sky to a single American aircraft. Mid-1944 unit logs from the area began showing days with no fighter scrambles, just notes like Corsairs sighted, engagement avoided. Units that once claimed dozens of victories now measured success by surviving another day without fighting. Staff studies within the fleet aviation community echoed the same conclusion. Technical overmatch demanded avoidance until a new airframe could close the gap. The conclusion ran 3 sentences. The F4U Corsair achieved air superiority through technical advantage that no amount of pilot skill can overcome. Recommend development of new aircraft to match Corsair performance. Until such aircraft exists, avoid combat. The new aircraft never arrived. Japanese pilots continued dying to Corsairs through 1945, but the real defeat happened earlier, when veteran pilots started painting "Avoid F4U" on ready room blackboards, when squadron commanders stopped assigning combat air patrols, when the morning prayer changed from victory to survival, the war in the air ended. Fuel gauges in Japanese fighters showed another problem. The extended climbs and evasive maneuvers against Corsairs drained tanks faster than combat planning anticipated. Pilots faced choosing between engaging with insufficient fuel to return or avoiding combat altogether. Most chose to live. Those who chose honor died with empty tanks, gliding toward the ocean while Corsairs circled above. The Corsair's psychological victory exceeded its tactical success. It transformed the Imperial Japanese Navy's aviation from an offensive force that terrorized the Pacific to a broken service hiding from single-engine fighters. The kill ratio tells one story: 11 Japanese aircraft for every Corsair lost in combat. But the operational records tell another. A warrior culture reduced to prey, elite pilots afraid to fly, an air force that conquered the Pacific running from American Marines in bent-wing fighters. In May 1943, Japanese pilots at Kahili laughed at reconnaissance photos of the ungainly Corsair. By May 1944, those same ready rooms displayed maps marked with red zones, labeled F4U Operating Area, Do Not Enter. The laughter died with the pilots who underestimated the bent-wing bird. The silence that replaced it spoke louder than any victory claim. The Corsair didn't just win the air war. It broke the spirit of Japanese naval aviation so completely that they stopped trying to fight back. The mirror of history reflects perfectly. Where confident laughter once filled Japanese briefing rooms, silence dominated by February 1944. The same boards that displayed victory tallies now showed evacuation routes. The same pilots who mocked the bent-wing fighter now whispered its name with genuine fear. The sign at Trooks Operations Center, added after the February massacre, captured the complete reversal: F4U Corsair, avoid at all costs. The samurai of the air, reduced to running from the machine they once mocked.